Hi, everyone. How are you? So today is February 1st, 2025. And I thought I would do a portrait of Princess Catherine. And I'm going to be using Black Widow pencils like I did for my last drawing. I don't know what it is about Black Widow. I just really like using them. I have Prismacolor and other ones, but I keep coming back to Black Widow. uh I guess I'm just in a Black Widow phase right now. So I don't think I've done a large portrait like this with Black Widow before. So it'll be interesting to see how it comes out. I make no guarantees how this is going to come out. It's going to do the best I can. So let's see. All right, so I picked out a whole bunch of pencils. I don't know what I'm going to finish today in this first part. I'm probably just going to finish the skin, but we'll see. All right, so for her skin, I chose eggplant. Where's my skin colors here? Yeah, for the light part of the skin. Oh, eggshell, not eggplant. We have food on the mind. Eggshell for the lightest shade. And for the mid-tone, I'm using light mocha. And then for the darker area, I'm using foxy brown. So these are for the skin. And also, I chose mahogany for the eyeshadow there. And I also have a black pencil in case I want to use that. And then for her hair, if I get to it, I chose for the light parts leather, for the mid-tones cinnamon, and for the dark tones huntsman. So, and then I also chose for the reddish hues on her face and her lips, I chose a rattlesnake, rusty, and chestnut. And then last but not least, for her green hats, I chose grass blade, green grass, and forest. So that if I get to the hats, those are my light, medium, and dark tones there. Yeah, so I've already traced over her outline of her face here. And I get started. This may take a little while. It is a large picture, so I've got to do a few layers here to get it all. And then I will use the Gamsol to smooth it out. So I'm starting with the eggshell and just doing as smooth as possible anyways. Layer for her face. I'm using Bristol vellum paper, which is a little bit of a tooth. And you do need to do a few layers, quite a few layers to get good coverage on it. But I think it should be good. See what happens. Again, this is eggshell, just for the light tone.
What happens to our thoughts when we don't think about them? Our brain usually learns quite slowly. It takes a lot of repetitions until we can, for example, play a piano piece, ride a bicycle safely, or park a car in reverse. But when we experience something exciting or are told an exciting story, we remember it immediately and may never forget it again without any repetition. This also applies to a new, exciting thought. One moment it is there, the next it disappears. But as soon as we sense that it could be of importance, we hold on to it and begin to imagine what effects it could have if we were to put it into practice. But even this would completely overwhelm our short-term memory if it were left to its own devices. Short-term memory is located in the frontal lobe of our brain, directly behind our thinking brow. Its function consists only of brain waves, or electrical impulses between nerve cells, but nothing is recorded, and thus no long-term memories are created. As soon as we have juggled a new thought in our frontal brain for longer than just a few seconds, it is in danger of being lost. A short distraction is enough. A cell phone ringtone, another thought, perhaps, and the original thread of thought would be gone forever, if there were not a very special brain structure that evolved to permanently record important events in our lives. And that includes our spontaneous ideas and thoughts, if our brain deems them noteworthy. This memory store for autobiographical memories comes in pairs, is about the size of a thumb, and is located in the two temporal lobes of our brain. Because of their shape, each resembling a seahorse, these longer-term memory stores are called hippocampi. Although we have two hippocampi, for the sake of simplicity, I will refer to the hippocampus only. Together with the olfactory brain, the hippocampus is part of the so-called archicortex, from the Greek arche, meaning beginning, and Latin cortex, meaning bark, which is the oldest region of our cerebral cortex in evolutionary history. In animal species that evolved much earlier than mammals, such as fish, the archicortex makes up most of the brain. In humans, however, it is completely covered by the neocortex, the new cortex, the evolutionary youngest part of the brain that only mammals possess. Although the two hippocampi together make up only 1% of human brain volume, without them, we would be completely incapable of remembering a thought or an episode in our lives for more than a few seconds. Only the hippocampus has the unique ability to permanently remember when and where we experienced or thought something, even if only once, and how it felt. In order for it to be able to write our autobiography throughout our lives, despite its relatively small size compared to our entire brain, and thus limited storage capacity, at least 3 functional adaptations were necessary in the course of its evolution. Knowledge of these is crucial to our understanding not only of how our individuality develops, but also of how we can lose it, and at worst become uniform creatures. Simple-minded and indeed historyless, like Henry Molaison, the first human to have his autobiographic memory removed. Regarding Henry. On September 1st, 1953, Henry Gustav Molaison, 1926 to 2008, underwent a fateful operation. After a bicycle accident in his childhood, Molaison suffered from epileptic seizures that could not be controlled with medication, making it necessary to remove the scar tissue in his brain. Whether it was out of a love of symmetry or an experimental interest has not been determined for a long time. Henry's surgeon, Dr. William B. Scoville, decided to surgically remove more than just the presumed origin of the electrical discharges. He generously amputated the hippocampus in both temporal lobes. Afterward, Henry was no longer himself. As soon as he awoke from the anesthesia, everyone realized that something terrible had happened. He did not know where he was. Worse, he could not memorize it, no matter how many times he was told. For Henry, there was no past and therefore no future. There was nothing left for him to orient and plan his life around. Without direction, Henry was bare any motive, according to Philip J. Hiltz, the biographer of H.M., as he was called in studies during his lifetime to protect his privacy. To be sure, his caretakers liked him, for he retained his good-natured, friendly manner, but his inability to remember them, and having to have the same conversations with him over and over again, gradually led them to view him as a pet, according to Hiltz. Though a loving person herself, Dr. Brenda Milner, a pioneer in memory research who cared for Henry for many years and revolutionized the neurobiology of memory based on his memory loss, Henry's tragic fate was a stroke of luck for humanity, remarked, "He lost his humanity. You can't develop friendship or any human affection for a person like that." A few years later, Scoville called his procedure an experiment, not therapy, and hoped in vain that his confession would discourage imitators from similarly rigorously testing the limits of human curiosity. The spirit of the times destroyed time and spirit in people like Henry in a rather brutal way. Today's works more subtly, but its work of destruction begins in the same part of the brain that was removed from Henry, and not just individually and as an experiment, but globally, and, if I am not mistaken, with full awareness of the devastating consequences of the procedure. 1. Emotional selection. To protect its own finite capacity, which is usually limited to a day's worth of experiences and thoughts, and to ensure that important information can be stored and recalled even at the end of a long day, the hippocampus must make choices. Not everything we experience or think about can be retained. The criterion for selection is the answer to the question of how it felt. In other words, did what we experienced or thought trigger an emotion and thus acquire meaning? For example, if I am walking along a fence and a nearby dog suddenly barks at me, I will not forget it because I was frightened and danger seemed imminent. Things that we do every day without thinking about them, or all stereotyped activities, are ignored by the hippocampal memory, which is why in the evening we often do not know whether we did something routine during the day. In other words, boredom is not its thing. So, if I want someone to remember something for life, I have to package my message emotionally, like a dog fiercely defending its territory. Instilling fear is a proven, if mostly unethical, means of achieving this goal. The hippocampus stores the responses to the time and place of a thought or experience in its input area. This permanent memory of place, when, and time where coordinates is called the dentate gyrus because of its anatomical shape. In the main part behind it, called the cornu ammonis, which resembles an ammon's horn, or the horn of a ram, it contains the memory for the daily emotional experience. It holds the answers to the questions, what did I experience or think, and how did it feel? However, this memory is limited to a daily load. GPS neurons. The olfactory brain remembers what was smelled, and the hippocampus remembers when and where something was smelled. This is how salmon remember landmarks during their first migration and later find their way back to their birthplace. Rats and other rodents use their sense of sight in addition to their sense of smell. To find their way in new terrain, their hippocampus creates maps for spatial orientation within minutes. Up to 30% of their hippocampal neurons become GPS coordinates, firing electrical signals precisely when the animals are at certain locations in the cage. Using external markers, the scientists were able to determine, almost to the square centimeter, where a rat was in the cage at the time of measurement, based solely on the activity pattern of the hippocampal neurons. Our consciousness can directly access the daily memories stored in the hippocampus. This is essential if we are to further develop a thought stored there, for example, by considering and weighing alternatives. However, the short-term memory, located in the frontal lobe, which we need in order to juggle our thoughts, would not be able to do this complex comparative thinking because it can only actively hold all the information in unstable brainwaves for a few seconds. short-term memory as a function of our frontal brain and autobiographical long-term memory as a function of our hippocampus must therefore work closely together if we want to be creative and develop new ideas. The hippocampus as our gateway to the space-time continuum. We are connected to the four-dimensional space-time continuum through the place and time neurons of the hippocampus. These special neurons store all our episodic experiences and thoughts as spatio-temporally anchored autobiographical memories. In 2014, the Nobel Prize in Medicine was awarded for the discovery of place neurons. But in my opinion, the discoverers of time neurons also deserve this high honor. After all, temporal information is also crucial for the encoding and retrieval of episodic memories. The U.S. neuroscientist Howard B. Eichenbaum, 1947 to 2017, stated the significance of this discovery in an article also published in 2014 as follows. Time cells, time neurons, thus provide an additional dimension that is integrated with spatial mapping. The robust representation of both time and space in the hippocampus suggests a fundamental mechanism for organizing the elements of experience into coherent memories. The place and time neurons give us a sense of space and time. Alzheimer's patients lose this early in the disease process, as it begins in the dentate gyrus. Because the hippocampus is only designed to handle a daily load of memorable events, most people are unable to store any more information in the evening, particularly after a busy day. In order for us to be receptive the next day, the hippocampus must move the new information into permanent storage. We can compare the memory contents of the hippocampus to the data on a memory stick. In order to be ready for recording again, the computer transfers the data on the memory stick from the limited memory space to an internal mass storage device. A similar kind of transfer also takes place in the hippocampus during sleep. 2. Nocturnal memory upload. During deep sleep, our brain transfers the emotionally significant thoughts and personal experiences collected in our limited memory stick, the hippocampus, to the neocortex. The neocortex has a much larger data storage capacity, so it serves as a kind of permanent storage medium, or neocortical hard drive. The process of storing what and how, that is, the emotional content of experiences or remarkable thoughts, on the neocortical hard disk takes place in the first deep sleep phases, called slow-wave sleep, SWS, because of their characteristic slow EEG waves. However, because the neocortex learns much more slowly than the hippocampus, memories in SWS must be told or recapitulated several times until the storage process is complete. The contents of a hippocampal memory are stored in fragmented form in different locations in the neocortex according to a rule that is not yet fully understood, which means that whenever we recall neocortical memories, defragmentation must take place. For contextual remembering, new memories are related to existing memory content. This happens in a later stage of sleep when we dream. As we sleep and try to follow our dream actions and experiences in the virtual space created by our brain, we often move our eyes rapidly. That's why this stage of sleep is called rapid eye movement REM sleep. In REM sleep, the new memories uploaded in SWS are linked to past memory content, so it is not uncommon for us to wake up in the morning with new insights. We need to sleep and dream to be able to remember what we have experienced and thought in the long term. A conscious reliving of our past experiences and thoughts is made possible when the hippocampus stores the access information to all neocortical memory fragments, like a register, also called index. To continue in a more tangible language, I will refer to these as neocortical index signatures. The hippocampus stores these signatures in the place and time neurons associated with each autobiographical memory, which I will refer to collectively as index neurons. These index neurons remain in the hippocampal dentate gyrus throughout life, anchoring, indexing all of our autobiographical memory content. Without these index neurons, our memory fragments stored on the neocortical hard drive would be impossible to find or reconstruct. Therefore, remembering is easier when we recall when and where something happened or was thought, thereby activating the place and time neurons responsible for that experience. Memory Palace. The fictional Sherlock Holmes uses it, and the 8-time world memory champion Dominic O'Brien recommends storing information in memory towns, using the keyword method in his books. However, the term memory palace is better known. Even in the ancient Roman and Greek schools of rhetoric, people were taught to mentally associate key words in a speech with specific locations, and then to walk along a previously stored route during the speech. In doing so, the ability of the hippocampus to spatially store or remember important thought content was ultimately exploited. That this actually works this way has already been scientifically investigated and proven by means of imaging procedures. Also, in the study entitled Durable Memories and Efficient Neural Coding Through Mnemonic Training Using the Method of Loci, showed that you don't have to be a memory world champion to boost your memory with this trick and remember even such trivial things as a shopping list with the help of hippocampal neocortical consolidation. All you have to do is place the things you want to remember quickly and effectively in a fictional house or palace so that you can recall them when you need them. To retrieve or recall an original memory, the groups of neurons that fired together to create the original memory need to be primed or reactivated, explains U.S. neuroscientist Shika Jane Goodwin in her article Neurogenesis, Remembering Everything or Forgetting Some. Forgetting, on the other hand, Goodwin says, is the inability to create the original firing pattern due to lost synapses and connections. Thus, the crucial question for our further considerations is how the hippocampus ensures that enough place and time neurons, or index neurons, are available throughout life so that we can always store and recall new thoughts and experiences right up to old age. Duplicated and competing memories. When we enthusiastically tell someone about a past experience, two things happen. First, the index neurons responsible for that memory are activated, allowing us to retrieve, reactivate, and reconstruct the stored experience from the neocortical hard drive. Second, the emotional narrative, and thus the anecdote itself, is stored again via the hippocampus, in a sense duplicating the original memory. This is one reason why early life experiences that have been recalled or told to others many times may exist in many copies, which may well vary as the repeatedly told story approaches a narrative ideal, to the point where the narrator is no longer able to distinguish it from the original experience. Even in the case of progressive Alzheimer's disease, when the hippocampus loses more and more of its index neurons, does not engage in productive neurogenesis, and is therefore hardly capable of forming new memories, there is still a high probability that at least one or a few of these index neurons still exist, referring to these neocortical copies. As a result, people with Alzheimer's can usually tell a story or two about their youth, but they may not remember where they are or who is sitting in front of them. 3. Lifelong production of new index neurons. I have referred to index neurons as the hippocampal neurons that store the spatial and temporal coordinates associated with interesting thoughts, conversations, and exciting experiences, while also referring to their fragmented storage locations distributed throughout the neocortex. The index neurons ensure that we can continue to access and reconstruct these memories after the nocturnal storage process. The dentate gyrus has the unique ability to produce thousands of new neurons every day, even in adults, to ensure that we always have a sufficient number of place and time-coding index neurons with which to form new memories and distinguish them from previous ones. If this were not the case, index neurons already in use would have to be increasingly overwritten, which would be equivalent to memory loss. This so-called adult hippocampal neurogenesis takes place mainly during REM sleep. An international team of researchers, led by stem cell researcher Jonas Frisén at the Karolinska Institute in Sweden, found that up to 1.5% of all hippocampal neurons are newly formed each year. This is significantly more hippocampal neurons than in any other species studied to date. And as Frisén's team was able to show, this new production continues throughout life in humans. Frisén's researchers calculated the individual age of existing hippocampal neurons by determining the radioactive carbon isotopes incorporated into the neuron's genetic material and thus inferring the production rate. In contrast, an international team led by neuropsychiatrist Maura Boldrini of Columbia University analyzed the hippocampus of brain-healthy people who had died between the ages of 14 and 79. They found similar numbers of neural progenitor precursor cells and thousands of immature neurons in the dentate gyrus in all age groups, confirming the Swedish finding. Commenting on the significance of these findings, Boldrini's team writes, "Healthy elderly people have the potential to remain cognitively and emotionally more intact than commonly believed, due to the persistence of AHN, adult hippocampal neurogenesis, into the 8th decade of life." In fact, over a 65-year age span, proliferating neural progenitors, immature and mature granule neurons, neurons at different stages of maturing, and dentate gyrus volume were unchanged. But the fact that the dentate gyrus is a bottleneck in the network allows a small fraction of neurons to have a significant impact on hippocampal circuitry and function, the researchers explain. Therefore, the new index neurons are required for efficient pattern separation, that is, the ability to distinguish similar experiences and store them as distinct memories, whereas the old neurons are required for pattern completion, which serves to link similar memories. A lack of pattern separation due to impaired or unproductive adult hippocampal neurogenesis may therefore lead to generalization, which is common in anxiety and depression in humans, according to Boldrini and her team. The researchers believe it is possible that ongoing hippocampal neurogenesis sustains human-specific cognitive function throughout life, but that declines may be linked to compromised cognitive emotional resilience. The importance of hippocampal neurogenesis for psychological or mental resilience and depression will be discussed in more detail later. But for now, let's keep in mind that the human dentate gyrus can constantly produce new neurons, or index neurons, into old age. However, these can only survive if they actually encode new experiences, or if their synapses are used to become part of the hippocampal network. There, they are responsible for the spatial and temporal differentiation of new memories. To do this optimally, they retain their juvenile character for some time, even when they are fully mature. They are extremely retentive and hungry for new experiences that they want to store. This appetite for new things is, in a way, an expression of their will to survive and the neural correlate of natural human curiosity. This was observed in experiments with animals, which are more willing to follow new paths when their hippocampal neurogenesis is activated. The hippocampal development of individuality and cultural complexity. Neuroscientists in the group of Gerd Kemperman, a leading German researcher in the field of neurodegenerative diseases, have investigated the role of adult hippocampal neurogenesis using inbred mice. Inspired by behavioral genetic investigations of human monozygotic twins reared together, we obtained dense longitudinal activity data on 40 inbred mice living in one large enriched environment, the researchers write in their article published in the prestigious journal Nature. Even just 3 months of living in a complex environment, their study concludes, led to a massive magnification of individual differences in explorative behavior among genetically identical individuals over time, and these differences were related to adult hippocampal neurogenesis. The environment that was identical for all mice lost its sameness over time and gave way to the emergence of a personalized life space and a mouse individuality, similar to what has been observed in humans for personality traits, the researchers say. The extent of individual differences observed in replications of this experiment naturally varied. Therefore, the researchers conclude, as the members of each new cohort individualize, their society will also be shaped in a slightly different individual way. Referring to previous scientific work, the new study supports the idea that the key function of adult neurogenesis is to shape hippocampal connectivity according to individual needs, and thereby to improve adaptability over the life course and to provide evolutionary advantage. This advantage cannot be valued highly enough. Not only are new index neurons the basis for natural curiosity, autobiographical knowledge, individuality, and ultimately creativity, but their function is also crucial on a societal level for the cultural progress of humanity. On the other hand, this makes index neurons, or their neurogenesis, the ideal target for implanting unquestioned narratives into the human brain. This is especially true when the attack on the hippocampal neurogenesis weakens psychological resilience. The psychically strong self. Every morning when I wake up and my brain's operating system boots, I go through a self-reflective process of recognition. It may only take a fraction of a second for me to recall memories that tell me who I am. Perhaps not all people initiate a self-reflective process consciously, but it happens to all of us. The more positive memories you can recall, the stronger your self-esteem will be, and the more resilient, confident, and efficient you will be when you start your day. For this conscious remembering, we need our hippocampus and a productive neurogenesis. In fact, the neurons that integrate into the hippocampus neural network each day do more than modulate the strength of the ego based on accumulated experience. By protecting us from excessive stress reactions, they also directly regulate our psychological resilience. A high level of mental resilience is a prerequisite for developing a readiness for new experiences and for avoiding potentially stressful situations in the first place. Glucocorticoids, cortisol and corticosterone, in addition to cortisone, are stress hormones released by the cortex of the adrenal glands in response to an acutely threatening situation. Among other things, they stimulate the production and release of sugar, glucose, so that we have enough energy to either fight or flee better, depending on which response seems more promising. Their release is a good thing. The vast majority of new situations trigger such a stress response a priori. It is not without reason that this response pattern has prevailed throughout evolution. It is better to first suspect danger and be prepared for the worst than to naively assume the best and then be surprised and possibly injured or even killed as a result. This reaction is vital in the short term, but harmful in the long term if a harmless situation is not recognized as such as soon as possible and the further release of stress hormones is stopped. The recognition is one of the tasks of the new index neurons being formed every day in the hippocampus, because only they are able to quickly and efficiently classify stressful situations in terms of their danger potential. On one hand, the hippocampus is one of the brain regions densely populated with receptors for these stress hormones, which allows it to measure the strength of the acute stress response. On the other hand, all relevant current information converges in its new index neurons, while in their immediate vicinity are those index neurons that have direct access to all previous experiences. Only in this way can a new situation be evaluated comparatively. If the situation is assessed as not dangerous, the release of glucocorticoids is normalized by appropriate signals from the hippocampus. However, not every new situation triggers a stress response because the regulatory mechanism of the release of stress hormones can intervene, preventing an unnecessary release. The condition is that the new situation is not too strange, as the two stem cell researchers, Antoine Bénard and Amar Sahay from the Harvard Medical School, explain in their article Adult Hippocampal Neurogenesis, Fear, Generalization, and Stress. In order to express fear only when it is appropriate, we have to constantly perform comparisons between previously encoded associations, experiences, and what actually happens. Such a mechanism is adaptive in that it allows an individual to anticipate a potential threat by detecting relevant cues present in the environment. Old index neurons, experiences, and new index neurons, the current situation, play a crucial role. Their cooperation allows an efficient appraisal of threat. It requires disambiguation of contextual information associated with safety and threat, as well as the discernment of the probability, certainty, Bénard and Sahay note, with which a cue predicts the threat. On the other hand, if hippocampal neurogenesis is disturbed, that is, if we do not have new index neurons, the stress hormone level rises excessively in any unfamiliar situation, and even after only moderate stress, it returns to the initial level very slowly, if at all. There is, therefore, a risk of chronic excessive glucocorticoid secretion if neurogenesis is disturbed. The fear of the unknown alone can lead to avoidance reactions, depressive illness, and cognitive impairment. In the long run, this can lead to Alzheimer's disease and many other lifestyle diseases, also mistakenly referred to as diseases of civilization. I will discuss pre- and post-traumatic stress syndrome in detail in Chapter 4, especially because chronic stress, chronically excessive glucocorticoid levels, paralyzes the production of new hippocampal neurons, closing a vicious circle that is life-threatening in the long run. The critical involvement of active adult hippocampal neurogenesis in the regulation of our mental resilience is further supported by the observation that synthetic antidepressants, such as those in the selective serotonin reuptake inhibitor class, exert their antidepressant effects primarily by activating hippocampal neurogenesis. Accordingly, there is a significant increase in hippocampal volume as a result of antidepressant treatment. Thus, the increase in adult hippocampal neurogenesis is sufficient to reduce anxiety and depression-like behaviors. However, the production of new neurons in the hippocampus is not only crucial for maintaining our cognitive emotional resilience, but also essential to our natural willingness and ability to think for ourselves. Thinking, System 2, or not thinking, System 1? This is the question. To consciously change one's behavior, one must first recognize that a change is necessary or might be beneficial. In addition, there must be a basic willingness to invest mental energy in even thinking about it. However, due to an often deficient hippocampal neurogenesis, more and more people are downright afraid of new things and therefore of behaving differently. Even if the necessity of a change is recognized as indispensable, for example, because the current behavior is obviously the cause of a disease process that could be stopped by changing the behavior, there is often a lack of willpower to implement it. Both thinking about a necessary change and the change itself, until it becomes a routine, require mental energy, which is often not available. Our executive and decision-making center, located in the frontal lobe of the brain, is responsible for such processes. But what kind of energy does it take to imagine a new way of life, to plan it, to make the decisions for an actual change, and to initiate its implementation? To answer this question, it is important to understand that our brain uses two different systems to maneuver us through life: System 1 and System 2. System 1 corresponds to the implementation of learned, repetitive behaviors, the things we do every day without having to think much about them. It includes the entire repertoire of stereotypical thought and behavior patterns that usually require little or no concentration and thus virtually no mental energy, since no real thinking is involved. This high energy efficiency allows our executive center to operate in System 1 mode by default, which is very beneficial. As a result, our brains are able to initiate and execute appropriate actions quickly and without thinking, even when we have little mental energy. For example, if a car is barreling toward me as I cross the street, it is not a good survival strategy to invest mental energy in trying to assess whether the driver might be able to brake in time, to take evasive action, or to figure out what a reasonable escape strategy might look like. It is better to act without thinking in such a situation and just jump to the side. Of course, our executive branch also makes mistakes, but it almost certainly makes them when it stereotypically reels off a familiar pattern of action in situations where reflection would be called for, drawing on System 1 content. In some cases, a kind of gut feeling signals to us that business as usual could be disastrous, and that it is high time to stop and think. To respond to such challenges, or to generate and explore new, alternative courses of action, our executive headquarters also has access to System 2, which may be considerably slower, but does indeed think things through. Fast acting and slow thinking. In 2002, the Israeli-American psychologist Daniel Kahneman and the U.S. economist Vernon L. Smith were awarded
Okay, so I finished the skin so far and put Gamsol over it. And again, for the skin, I used for the light tone, the eggshell, and mid tone, light mocha. And for the dark tone, I used foxy brown. Those are the main colors I used for the skin. I also used some mahogany, the eyebrow, and some darker areas, and a little bit of midnight black. And that's it. Those are all the colors I used from Black Widow on the skin on the face so far. The first layer there and first layers, and put Gamsol over it. So I'm going to let it dry and come back later and work some more on this portrait. So I hope you enjoyed this. Thanks for watching. Bye bye.